there is a village at the foot of a mountain. Not a large village, a handful of houses, tucked between the cedar forest and a winding river, where the mist comes low in the mornings and the evenings arrive early, earlier than anywhere else, because the mountain blocks the setting sun. The people there grow rice in small paddies cut into the hillside. They gather mushrooms in autumn. They fish the cold river in summer. They know the names of every path through the forest above them, and they know which paths should not be taken alone. In this village, in a small house near the edge of the trees, there lived a mother and her 3 sons. The eldest was called Taro. He was tall and quick to act, the kind of young man who always walked ahead and spoke before he had fully listened. The middle son was Jiro. He admired his older brother completely. Where Taro went, Jiro followed. What Taro said, Jiro agreed with. Between the two of them, they made a great deal of noise and got a great deal done, and rarely stopped to wonder whether what they were doing was the right thing to do. The youngest was Saburo. He was quieter than his brothers. He noticed things they did not notice, the way a cloud moved before rain, the direction a bird called from, the expression on a stranger's face when they thought no one was watching. He was not slow, exactly. He was simply careful. He took his time. For several weeks now, their mother had been unwell. It had begun as a tiredness in her limbs, a heaviness she could not shake, even after a full night of sleep. Then the cough came. Then the long afternoons when she lay on her sleeping mat and stared at the ceiling and said very little. The 3 brothers did what they could. Taro and Jiro split the firewood and carried the water. Saburo cooked the meals, quiet and careful in the kitchen, tasting everything twice before bringing it to her. But she barely ate, and she grew thinner, and the color left her face the way color leaves the leaves at the very end of autumn, when the last warmth goes out of the air and everything turns pale. One morning, when the first frost had silvered the grass outside, and the breath of the 3 brothers rose in small clouds as they knelt beside her sleeping mat, their mother spoke. She had not said much in several days. When she did speak now, her voice was soft and careful, the way someone speaks when they are not sure how many words they have left. She said that she had been dreaming about the mountain pear. She said it so quietly that Taro asked her to repeat it. She said it again. The mountain pear. Yamanashi. In the deep forest above the village, on the far side of the high ridge, there grew a tree that bore a fruit unlike any other. The Yamanashi was small and pale, slightly rough on the skin, and when you bit into it, the flesh was cool and faintly sweet and faintly sour at the same time, the way mountain air is cool and the smell of cedar is sharp and somehow restful together. It was said that the fruit had properties beyond its taste, that it could restore color to pale skin, that it could quiet a cough, that it could give back something that sickness had taken away. Whether all of this was true or only believed to be true, the 3 brothers did not know, but their mother had said that she dreamed about it, and that was enough. That evening, after she had fallen asleep, the 3 brothers sat around the fire and spoke in low voices. Taro said he would go first. "Of course," said Jiro. Saburo said nothing. He looked at the fire and turned a piece of kindling slowly in his hands. Taro said the mountain was not so far. He had climbed to the ridge before, in summer, with friends, gathering mushrooms. He knew the way. He would leave at first light, and be back before dark with a basket full of Yamanashi. He said this with the full confidence of someone who has not yet encountered the particular difficulty that lies ahead of them. Saburo looked at the fire. He said, "I have heard that the path above the ridge goes through difficult country, that there is a place where the road divides and it is easy to go wrong." Taro waved this off. He said he would simply follow the obvious path. He said there was no need to worry. That night, the frost deepened. The stars were very clear. In the small house, the mother breathed softly in her sleep, and the three brothers lay in the darkness and listened to the forest settling into cold. Part 2. Taro's Journey. Taro left before sunrise. He pulled on his heavy jacket and his straw sandals, picked up the empty basket, and walked out into the dark morning without waking his brothers. The village was silent at that hour. The river made its constant sound. A dog stirred somewhere and then went quiet again. Above the rooftops, the sky was beginning to pale at its very farthest edge, a thin line of gray where the darkness softened into something almost blue. Taro was not afraid of the dark. He had grown up at the edge of a forest, and he knew the sounds it made at night, the small rustlings and the owl calls and the creak of branches in no wind, and none of it frightened him. He walked at a good pace, the basket bouncing lightly on his back, his breath rising in small white puffs in the cold air. The path climbed steadily, through the lower forest first, where the trees were mostly cedar and pine, their trunks dark and straight, the ground beneath them soft with years of fallen needles, then higher, where the trees changed, where oaks and maples grew in among the conifers, their bare branches making a complicated net against the lightening sky. The frost was heavy on everything. Each fallen leaf was edged in white. The rocks at the side of the path were furred with it. Taro's footsteps made a soft crunch with every step he took. By the time the sun fully cleared the ridge behind him, he was already halfway up the mountain. He stopped for a moment on a flat rock that jutted out over the slope below and looked back at the village. From here it was very small, a scatter of rooftops, gray and brown, half hidden among the bare trees. The paddies were empty and silver with frost. The river caught the low light and threw it back. He thought of his mother. He turned and kept climbing. It was near the top of the first ridge that he saw the old woman. She was sitting on a large tree stump at the side of the path, wrapped in a faded gray shawl, her white hair pinned loosely at the back of her head. She was very old. Her face was as weathered as the bark of the trees around her. Her eyes, though, were clear and dark, and they watched him as he approached with a steadiness that was hard to look away from. She held out a small red bowl. She said she was very thirsty. She said she had been sitting here for some time and she had run out of water. She asked if he could go to the stream a little way back down the path and bring her some. Taro looked at the bowl. He looked at the old woman. He looked at the path ahead of him, climbing up and over the ridge and disappearing into the forest beyond. He said he was in a hurry. He said he had a sick mother at home and he needed to reach the Yamanashi tree before dark. He said there was probably water not far ahead. The old woman said nothing. She drew the bowl back and held it in both hands and looked at the ground. Taro walked past her. He did not look back. At the top of the ridge, the path divided into three. Taro had not known about this. He stood at the fork and looked at the 3 tracks leading off in slightly different directions into the deep forest beyond. They all looked similar, narrow, a little overgrown, disappearing into shadow. There was a wind up here, coming across the ridge from the north, cold and steady. He could hear it moving through the bamboo grass on all sides, a dry rustling, like the sound of distant water. He chose the middle path. It seemed most direct. He walked for a long time. The forest on this side of the ridge was different from the lower slopes. The trees were older and larger. The canopy closed above him. The light that came through was dim and greenish, filtered through the remaining leaves that had not yet fallen. The path grew narrower. The ground became softer and then wetter, and then he realized that the path was leading him downhill toward a low place in the landscape where the trees grew even darker and the air smelled of deep, still water. He heard the surface of the marsh before he saw it. He stepped between 2 large cedars and found himself at the edge of dark water. The surface was absolutely still. It reflected the pale sky above it and the bare branches of the trees around it, and the reflection was so perfect that it was difficult to tell where the water ended and the sky began. The path ended here. There was no Yamanashi tree. There was nothing but the marsh and the dark water and the silence. And then, below the surface, something moved. Something large and slow. The water barely rippled, but the ripple moved outward from a point directly in front of him. Slowly, evenly, the way a breath moves outward when you breathe out into perfectly still air. Taro did not return that day. In the village below, his brothers waited. The sun reached its low winter point and began its slow descent toward the western hills. The mother slept. The fire burned low, and Jiro sat by the door and watched the path that came down from the mountain and saw no one on it. Part 3. Jiro's Journey. By the following morning, when Taro had still not come home, Jiro had made up his mind. He told Saburo that Taro had probably simply stayed the night on the mountain, sheltering somewhere when it got too dark to walk. He said this with confidence. He almost believed it himself. But there was something in the way the morning felt, a particular quality to the silence of the village, the way the frost lay heavier than usual, the way even the river sounded quieter, that made the confidence feel brittle when he pressed against it. He packed his basket quickly. He took a length of rope because Taro had not, and he thought that if Taro had somehow gotten himself stuck somewhere, a rope might be useful. He told Saburo to stay home and look after their mother. Saburo said nothing at first. He looked at the mountain visible beyond the rooftops at the end of the lane, gray against the pale sky. Then he said, "Be careful, at the place where the path divides." Jiro said he knew. He knew about the 3 paths. He would simply follow the right one. Saburo looked at him. He asked how he would know which one was right. Jiro said he would figure it out when he got there. He left. Saburo watched him go, the basket on his back, walking quickly, the straw sandals making their soft sound on the frost-stiffened path. Then Saburo went inside and knelt beside his mother's sleeping mat and looked at her face. She was breathing. Her color was not good, but she was breathing. He put a little more wood on the fire. Jiro climbed the mountain the way he had always done everything, quickly and without much hesitation, following the path his brother had taken, trying to read the signs that would tell him what had gone wrong. He was a good tracker, in the way that a person becomes a good tracker who has spent their whole life in a village at the edge of a forest. He could read a path. He could tell when someone had passed, how recently, whether they had been walking easily or with effort. He could see that his brother had come this way. The frost had preserved the impressions of Taro's sandals in the soft earth at the side of the path. He followed them upward. It was near the top of the ridge that he saw the old woman. She was in the same place, on the same stump, wrapped in the same gray shawl. Jiro had not been expecting her. He stopped a few paces away. She held out the small red bowl. She said she was very thirsty. She said she had been sitting here and she had run out of water. She asked if he could bring her some from the stream below. Jiro thought about this. He was not unkind, not exactly, but he had come for a purpose, and his brother was missing, and he had a sick mother at home, and the day was already past its middle. He thought about the stream below. It would take time. He said he was sorry, but he was in a hurry. He said he was looking for his brother, and he needed to reach the other side of the ridge before dark. The old woman looked at him for a moment. Her dark eyes were steady. Then she looked down at the bowl in her hands. Jiro walked past her. At the top of the ridge, he found the place where the path divided. He stood there longer than his brother had. He looked at each of the 3 paths and tried to read them. The left-hand path curved away into oak forest. The right-hand path dropped steeply downhill. The middle path went straight forward into tall cedar, disappearing quickly into the shadows. He looked for his brother's footprints. The ground up here was harder, scoured by wind, and he could not find them. He stood there for a while. The wind moved through the bamboo grass at the edge of the path, making a dry sound, a whispering, rustling sound, as though the grass were trying to tell him something in a language he almost understood. He chose the right-hand path. It dropped down toward a low place between 2 ridges, and he thought that if the Yamanashi grew near water, as mountain fruit often did, then the lowest ground was where he should look. The path brought him down through scrubby oak, and then through reeds, and then out onto the edge of a marsh. It was not the same marsh that had taken his brother. It was a different low place, a different dark water, a different stillness, but the stillness was the same, and the thing that moved beneath the surface was the same kind of thing. Jiro also did not return. That night, in the small house at the edge of the village, Saburo fed his mother a little rice broth and helped her sit up against the wall. She asked where his brothers were. He said they had gone to find the Yamanashi. She was quiet for a moment. Then, she said she hoped they were safe. Saburo said he was sure they were fine. He kept his voice very steady. After she had fallen asleep again, he sat by the fire for a long time. He thought about his brothers. He thought about the mountain. He thought about the old woman on the stump, because he had not told his brothers about her, only that the path divided, and he felt now that this had been a mistake, that there was something about her he should have said more clearly. He had not seen her himself. He had only heard, in the way that you hear things in a village that has lived at the foot of a mountain for many generations, that there was sometimes an old woman on the high path who asked for water, and that the asking meant something. He should have said this to Taro. He should have said it more clearly to Jiro. He sat by the fire. Outside, the wind moved through the village. The frost crept across the window paper in slow branching patterns, like the roots of a tree growing in silence. He made a decision. He would go in the morning. Part 4. Saburo's Journey. Before he left, Saburo spent a long time preparing. He made sure the fire had enough wood to last through the morning. He left a covered pot of rice broth on the warm stones beside the hearth, where it would stay warm but not burn. He left a cup of water within easy reach of his mother's sleeping mat. He left a note, though she might not have the strength to read it, explaining where he had gone and saying he would be back before the day was out. Then he stood in the doorway for a moment and looked back at her sleeping figure, the rise and fall of her breathing just visible under the quilt, and he thought about all the mornings she had stood in that same doorway and watched the three of them go out into the world. He turned and walked toward the mountain. He climbed more slowly than his brothers, not because he was less strong, but because he was watching carefully as he went. He noticed which branches had been brushed by a passing coat. He noticed where the frost was disturbed in a way that suggested recent footsteps. He read the path the way you read a letter from someone you know well, looking for what it was trying to say beyond the obvious. The morning was cold and still. In the lower forest, a pair of jays moved through the canopy above him, their calls sharp and carrying, echoing off the cedar trunks. A woodpecker worked somewhere deeper in the trees, its percussion steady and hollow. The frost was lifting now, a thin mist rising from the leaf litter where the sun reached through the branches. Everything smelled of cold earth and cedar resin, and the faint sweetness of fallen leaves beginning their long, slow return to soil. He stopped once, about a quarter of the way up, at a place where the path bent around the base of a very large cedar. The tree was old, older than the village, probably. Its bark was deeply furrowed, each furrow holding its own small world. Moss and lichen and the dried husks of insects, and, here and there, tiny ferns that had somehow found enough moisture to persist through the cold. He put his hand on the bark and felt the cold roughness of it under his palm. He thought about his brothers. He thought about the fact that they had both come this way, past this same tree, and had not stopped, had not looked, had moved past with their purposes clear in front of them and their attention fixed on the ridge ahead. He was not criticizing them, even in his thoughts. That was simply how they were. It was how most people were. The destination was the thing. The journey was the inconvenience between here and there. Saburo had always been different. He had never been quite sure whether this was a strength or a failing. In a village, you needed to get things done. Pausing to look at trees was not, by itself, useful, but sometimes he thought the pausing was exactly the thing. He took his hand from the bark and kept climbing. The forest changed as he rose. The cedars gave way gradually to a mix of oak and maple, their bare branches making a fine dark lacework against the pale sky. The ground underfoot changed too, softer in places where the leaves had accumulated deeply, harder where rock lay just below the surface, and the thin soil had frozen solid. He passed through a section of the path where the trees fell back on both sides, and a long view opened to the west, across a series of ridges, going away into a pale haze, each one slightly bluer than the one before it, until the farthest ridge was barely distinguishable from the sky. He stood there for a moment. The wind was stronger here, in the open, and it came from the west, from across all those pale ridges, carrying the smell of things he could not quite identify. Snow, perhaps, distance, the absence of people. He thought of his mother. He thought of the look on her face in the firelight, the particular quality of her stillness, the way a person becomes still when they are conserving something, when the ordinary business of moving through the world has become effortful. He had seen that look before, not on her, on others, old people, mostly, in the winter of their lives. He did not want to think that his mother had reached that place. He pushed the thought down. He turned from the view and kept walking. Higher up, the path entered a section where the trees were very close together, where the canopy above was almost continuous, and the light came through only in small shifting patches. It was darker here, quieter. The sounds of the lower forest did not reach this far. The jays and the woodpecker had been left behind. What sounds there were subtler. The creak of a branch somewhere, the very faint sound of his own breathing, the soft crunch of his footsteps on the frozen ground. He walked for a long time, thinking about his brothers and watching the path. It was near the top of the first ridge that he saw the old woman. She was sitting on the large tree stump, exactly where he had somehow expected her to be, wrapped in the gray shawl, her white hair loosely pinned, her dark eyes watching him approach with a steadiness that he found, now that he was actually facing it, more reassuring than unsettling. She held out the small red bowl. She said she was very thirsty. She said she had run out of water. She asked if he could bring her some from the stream below. Saburo looked at the bowl. He looked at her face. He looked at the stream, visible a short distance back down the path, running clear and cold over pale stones. He said, of course. He took the bowl from her hands and went back down to the stream and filled it with clean water and brought it back. She held the bowl in both hands and drank slowly, the way someone drinks when they have been thirsty for a very long time. When she had finished, she held the empty bowl and looked at him. She said she had seen 2 young men pass this way before him. She said neither had stopped. She said she had watched both of them go over the ridge and away, and she knew where they had ended up, and she was sorry for them, and sorry for him, because she knew that he was their younger brother, and that he was here to find them. Saburo was quiet for a moment. Then he asked if she could help. She said she could tell him what he needed to know. She said that at the top of the ridge, the path divided into 3. She said that when he reached that place, he should not choose with his eyes, because all 3 paths looked the same, and only one was right. She said he should choose with his ears. She said that the wind on the ridge moved through the bamboo grass on all sides, and that the grass spoke, and that he should listen to what it said and go where it told him. Saburo listened carefully. He asked her which Marsh had taken his brother Taro, and which had taken his brother Jiro, and whether there was a way to bring them back. The old woman looked at him for a long time. Then she reached into the fold of her shawl and took out 2 things. The first was a small knife, its blade dark and narrow, its handle wrapped in cord that had been wound so many times it was hard to say what the handle was made of. The second was a deep lacquer bowl, black on the outside, red inside, very old. She said that the knife would cut through what the water held. if he was not afraid to use it. She said that the bowl would give him something to stand on when the ground beneath him was not solid. She said these things in a matter-of-fact way, the way an older neighbor might give you directions to a place you have not been before. Saburo sat with what she had said for a moment. He thought about the knife and what it meant to cut through what water held. He thought about the bowl and what it meant to stand on something that should not hold weight. He had grown up, as everyone does, in a world of solid and clear things, paths that went somewhere, tools that did what they were supposed to do, problems that had solutions you could hold in your hands. What the old woman was describing was different from that. Not impossible exactly, but different. It required a different kind of attention, a willingness to let the ordinary rules be suspended for a while, to act as though the world were more various than it usually appeared. He thought he could do this. He was not entirely sure, but he thought he could. He received both objects carefully. He held the knife in his right hand and turned it slowly. The blade caught the thin winter light and threw a small, cold gleam. The handle was comfortable in his palm, not light and not heavy, exactly the weight a thing should be when it belongs in your hand. The bowl he held in his left. It was heavier than he expected, heavier than something that size had any right to be. The lacquer was worn in places, showing the dark grain of the wood beneath, and that worn quality, that evidence of long use, made him trust it somehow. He thanked her. He thanked her the way he thanked people, quietly and directly, looking at her face, not the formal thanks of obligation, but the simpler, more direct kind that passes between people who have just given each other something real. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said something he had not expected. She said that the mountain did not keep what it was given freely. She said that the marsh takes the proud because they come in wanting something and leave no room for what might be offered. She said that the marsh takes the imitative because they come in following another and have no attention of their own. She said that the youngest son is not always the one who succeeds because he is youngest, but because in every story that has a youngest son, the youngest son has learned from watching the ones who went before, has had the longest time in the world of the house, close to the fire, close to the voices of the old, and has therefore arrived at the mountain, knowing something the others did not. She said all of this without looking at him, looking instead at the bowl in his hands. Then she looked up. She said, "Go now." She said the day does not stay long on this side of the mountain. Saburo put the knife carefully in his jacket and the bowl into his basket and walked on up the path toward the ridge. The last section of the climb was the steepest. The path here was less a path and more a suggestion, a series of places where the rock was worn slightly smooth by years of feet, where the roots of the trees had arranged themselves almost like steps. He climbed carefully, using his hands sometimes, the basket shifting on his back. The trees here were low and gnarled, shaped by the wind that came off the ridge in all seasons, their trunks growing not straight up but slightly sideways, all of them leaning the same direction, the direction away from the prevailing wind, like a crowd of people all turning their faces from something. He reached the top of the ridge and stopped. The view from here was very wide. Behind him, the village, small and quiet in its valley, the paddies empty and silver, the river its silver thread. Ahead, the far side of the mountain, which he had never seen before, sloping away into deep forest, the trees thick and dark, the land folding into hollows and ridges that went on for as far as he could see. Somewhere in that landscape, his brothers. The wind was blowing, as she had said. It came from no particular direction, moving around the open ridge in slow, shifting currents, reversing itself, and changing without warning, so that it seemed to come from everywhere at once. He could hear it in the bamboo grass that grew in thick stands on either side of the fork, and the sound it made was exactly what she had described. A speaking sound. Not words, but something like the intention of words, a direction, a leaning, a current of meaning moving through the noise. He stood very still. He let the wind move past him. He let the sound of the grass come to him fully, not trying to interpret it yet, just letting it arrive, the way you let a sound arrive before you try to understand it. He breathed slowly, in and out. He let the sound settle over him the way you let your eyes adjust when you walk from bright light into a dim room, not forcing the adjustment, just waiting for it to happen by itself. And then he heard it. The left-hand path. The bamboo on the left side of the fork was moving differently from the rest. Not more, not less. Differently. Its rhythm was slightly out of step with the wind's rhythm, its feathery heads tipping toward the path and away, toward and away, in a pattern that had nothing to do with the direction the wind was blowing. It was, he thought, the sound of something trying to be heard. He took the left-hand path. Part 5. The Marsh and the Tree. The left-hand path descended gradually through a forest of old oaks, their trunks wide and gray, their roots lifting the path in long, slow ridges. The leaves underfoot here were thick and mostly dry, and they made a sound as Saburo walked through them, a papery whispering, the sound of the year turning. The light on this side of the ridge was different from the light on the other side. On the side he had climbed, the sun came across the valley in the morning, reaching the trees at a low angle that made everything bright and detailed, every branch distinct, every shadow long and sharp. Here, on the far side, the sun would not reach until much later in the day, and by the time it did, it would already be beginning its descent. The light was therefore softer, more diffuse, filtered through layers of cloud that had gathered while he was on the open ridge. It was the kind of light that makes a forest feel very old. He walked carefully. He was thinking about what the old woman had said, about the bowl and the knife, turning the words over slowly, the way you turn an unfamiliar object over to understand its shape. He was also listening. The forest here was quiet, but not completely quiet. There were small sounds, the kind of sounds that are always present in a winter forest if you stop making sounds yourself and simply hear what is there. The creak of branches, the faint percussion of something dripping somewhere in the trees, the movement of a small animal, a mouse or a vole, quick and secretive in the leaf litter. He had been walking for perhaps half an hour when the quality of the ground changed beneath his feet. It was subtle at first, a slight softness, a give, where before there had been resistance, the ground not quite yielding, but no longer firm in the ordinary way. Then the smell changed. A deeper smell came up through the cold, underneath the cedar and the fallen leaves, a smell of water that had been still for a very long time. rich and dark and cold. The smell of earth that had been wet for so long it had become something else, something between soil and water, neither quite solid nor quite liquid. He slowed. The trees began to change around him. The oaks gave way to willows, their bare branches trailing, and then to something older, trees he did not have names for, with gray, mossy trunks and roots that rose above the ground in tangled arches, like the knuckles of old hands. The ground between the roots was dark and soft, and when he stepped on it, it moved slightly, a slow, reluctant compression that told him the water was not far below. He took the bowl from his basket. He held it for a moment, feeling its weight. He thought about what the old woman had said. He thought about trust, and about the particular kind of trust required when you cannot test something in advance, when the only way to know whether a thing will hold you is to step onto it and find out. He heard the water before he saw it. Not a stream, not the bright, quick sound of running water. This was a deeper sound, more still, the sound that water makes when it is very old and very cold, and nothing disturbs it. A sound between silence and presence. He came out from between two large trees and found himself at the edge of the marsh. It was large, larger than he had imagined from the sound of it. The surface stretched away before him, dark and perfectly still, reflecting the pale gray sky above it with an accuracy that made the reflection seem more real, somehow, than the thing it was reflecting. The bare branches of the trees around the edge were doubled in the water, reaching both up and down, so that the marsh seemed ringed by two forests, one growing toward the light and one growing away from it, into the cold dark below. He stood very still and looked at the surface. It was absolutely still, not the stillness of something resting, the stillness of something that was always still, that had no relationship with movement, that existed in a state entirely outside the ordinary world of wind and weather and the passage of days. He looked for his brothers. For a moment he could not see them. The marsh was wide and the light was poor, and the center of the marsh was far away. Then he saw the low shape, barely above the waterline, a dark mound of earth in the middle of all that stillness, and on the mound, two figures. He set the bowl on the surface of the water. It settled, not the way a leaf settles, drifting and uncertain, not the way a stone settles, sinking. It settled the way a table settles when it is placed on even ground, with a solidity and purpose that suggested it had always been meant to be exactly there. He stood at the edge of the marsh and looked at the bowl floating before him, and he thought about everything it would require to step onto it. Not courage, exactly. Something else. Something more like the willingness to stop arguing with what was in front of him. The bowl was there. It was floating. It was waiting. He stepped onto it. It held. The surface of the water moved slightly, a small ripple going outward from beneath the bowl, and then settling again. He stood on the bowl and felt the marsh beneath him, its depth and its cold and its great stillness, and he felt very small standing above all of that, but he did not step back. The bowl moved, not because he propelled it, because the surface of the marsh was moving it in the way that a slow river moves a leaf, without effort, without will. He stood very still and let it carry him. The crossing took a long time. The marsh was wider than it had looked from the edge, the far side receding and advancing in the flat, unchanging light. There was no sound but the very faint sound of water moving past the bowl's edge, a soft sound, almost like breathing. He looked down once into the water beside him. He could see nothing. The marsh was dark all the way down, but he was aware, in the way that you are sometimes aware of a presence before you see it, that there was something below, something old and vast and cold, not threatening him, not attending to him, simply present, in the way that very old things are present, the way a mountain is present, the way winter is present, not doing anything to you, simply being a fact of the world you move through. He looked ahead. The mound was close now. He could see his brothers clearly. Taro sitting with his back slightly bent, his chin lowered. Jiro beside him, one knee up, his hands resting loosely, both of them deeply, completely asleep. The bowl came to rest against the edge of the mound. Saburo stepped off onto solid ground, or what passed for solid ground here, the dark earth soft and cool under his sandals. He knelt beside his brothers. He called their names. He shook their shoulders. He took their hands in his and found them cold, deeply cold, the cold of the water having entered them, the way cold enters a stone left out overnight in winter. But their breathing continued, slow and steady, the breathing of deep, unavoidable sleep. Below the surface of the water, at the edge of the mound, something moved. Saburo took the knife from his jacket. He did not know exactly what to do. The old woman had said it would cut through what the water held if he was not afraid to use it. He was afraid. He was afraid in the way that you are afraid when you understand that you are very small and what you are facing is very old. But he did what he did not because he was not afraid, but because he was afraid, and went ahead anyway, which is the only kind of courage that is actually useful. He knelt at the edge of the mound. He put the blade of the knife into the dark water. The ripple stopped. There was a moment of absolute stillness, a held breath. The marsh and the knife and Saburo, all very still together. And then something released. Deep below the surface, the great shape that had been still began to move. Not toward him, away, slowly, without urgency, the way something very old and very large moves when it has decided to go, when it has recognized something it cannot hold against, and has simply chosen to let go. The dark shape moved away through the water, deeper and deeper, until it was gone. A shift in the quality of the air, a lightening, as though the pressure of something old had lifted and withdrawn into the cold and the dark where it had come from. Taro took a long, slow breath. Jiro's hands, still held in Saburo's, grew slightly warmer. They woke slowly, the way someone wakes from a very deep sleep, blinking, confused, not sure where they are or how much time has passed. Taro looked at his brother. He looked at the marsh around them. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "How long have I been here?" Saburo said, 2 days. Taro looked down at the water. Jiro woke more quietly. He simply opened his eyes and looked at Saburo and then at Taro and then at the sky above them, which was beginning to show the first faint color of late afternoon. He said they needed to go. The bowl carried all 3 of them back across the marsh to the solid ground at its edge. It was lower in the water now, with the weight of 3, and the cold marsh water came over the rim slightly as they crossed, chilling their feet. But it held. They stood on the bank. For a moment, None of them spoke. They looked back at the marsh. The surface was still again. Whatever had moved below it had settled. The center of the marsh was empty. Just dark water. Just reflection. Taro said, "We never found the Yamanashi tree." Saburo said, "I know where it is." He had seen it as they crossed back at the far edge of the marsh, half hidden in a stand of old oaks, a tree unlike the others, its bark pale gray, its form open and reaching, and on its branches, small and pale and numerous, the winter fruit still hanging, having somehow survived the frosts. They went to it together. The Yamanashi were small, slightly rough to the touch, cool in the hand the way a stone from a riverbed is cool. Saburo picked carefully, choosing the ones that were most ripe, filling the basket slowly. The light was going now, the sky behind the ridge turning the particular soft orange that a winter sky turns in the last few minutes before dark. The three brothers stood under the tree in the fading light and picked quietly, not talking very much. When the basket was full, they turned toward home. Part 6. The Return. They came down the mountain in the last of the light. The path was familiar beneath their feet, at least on the upper portion, the section that Taro and Jiro had walked before. Saburo went first, because he knew the path better now, having come up it that morning with his full attention on every step. Taro followed. Jiro came last, moving more slowly than usual, still shaking off the cold that had settled deep into him. They did not speak much at first. There is a particular silence that falls between people after something extraordinary has happened, something that none of them have any previous experience with, anything to compare it to, any words ready-made for it. The silence is not awkward. It is necessary. It is the silence of the mind, doing its slow, quiet work of finding a place for the new thing among all the old things. Taro broke it first. He said, very quietly, "I did not bring her water." Saburo understood what he meant. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said that the old woman had given him the bowl and the knife. He said she had not seemed angry. Taro was quiet. Then he said he did not think that was the point. Jiro, behind them, said nothing. They walked on. The forest around them was shifting into its evening state, the light going blue and dim, the shapes of the trees becoming less distinct, their outlines blurring slightly the way things blur at the edge of a candle's reach. The birds that had been present in the morning were absent now, settled somewhere for the night, tucked into the hollows of trees and the dense centers of bushes, waiting for the dark to pass. Saburo thought about what Taro had said. He thought about the way his brother had understood, without being told, something that Saburo had thought you could only understand by having experienced its consequence. But perhaps that was not how it worked. Perhaps some people understood things in advance of the experience, and the experience only confirmed what they already knew. And perhaps the experience could teach what the knowing had not. He thought about the old woman on the stump. He thought about the way she had looked at him when he came back with the water. Not grateful, exactly. Not surprised. Something more like recognition, as though she had been waiting for a particular thing, and he had been the one who finally did it. He did not know who she was. He had his guesses. The mountain, perhaps, taking a form that could be approached. Some older thing. Something that had been here before the village was built, before the paths were worn, before anyone had a name for this mountain or for what lived on it, or simply an old woman who sat on a stump and was thirsty. He thought perhaps it did not matter which. The lower forest opened around them, and they could see the valley below, the last light lying along the river, the village a dark scatter of shapes against the hillside. The smoke was rising from the houses, each thin column going straight up in the still evening air, before being caught by some high current and bending sideways, all of them bending the same direction, east, toward the far mountains. Jiro came up beside Saburo. He looked at the village for a moment. Then he said, quietly, "I should have brought her the water too." Saburo looked at his brother. Jiro was looking at the village, not at him. His jaw was set in the way it set when he was thinking about something difficult. Saburo said, "I know." Jiro nodded. They kept walking. The path brought them through the lower cedar forest, where the air smelled sharply of resin, and the darkness came earlier under the closed canopy. Their footsteps were softer here, on the needle-covered ground, and the three of them moved through the trees almost without sound, 3 figures in the dark forest, going home. The village sounds reached them before the light did. The low sound of the river, the creak of a door somewhere, the distant bark of a dog. And then, as they came out from the last trees and onto the track that led between the paddies, the smell of wood smoke and cooking and the warm animal smell of houses with fires burning inside them. Saburo pushed open the door of their house and went inside. The fire was still going. The room was warm. His mother was awake, sitting up against the wall, the quilt pulled up around her, her face turned toward the door. She looked at her 3 sons standing in the doorway. The light from the fire moved across all 3 of their faces, warm and unsteady, and she looked at each face in turn. She did not ask where they had been. She did not ask what had happened. She simply looked at them for a long, quiet moment, the way a person looks at something they were afraid they might not see again, taking it in slowly, not rushing. Taro crossed the room and sat down beside her and put his hand over hers. He did not say anything. His mother looked at his hand for a moment and then turned hers over and held it. Jiro closed the door. The cold that had come in with them was slowly displaced by the warmth of the fire. Saburo sat down beside her and took the Yamanashi from the basket, one at a time, and set them in a small wooden bowl and brought it to her. She held one of the fruits in her hands. It was small and pale, slightly rough on its skin, cool to the touch in the way that things are cool when they have come from a cold place and not yet taken on the warmth of the room around them. She turned it slowly, looking at it. Then she brought it to her lips and bit into it. The flesh was cool, faintly sweet, faintly sour, the way mountain air is both things at once, the way cold water from a mountain stream tastes of the stone it has run over and the sky that fell into it. She chewed slowly. She swallowed. She was quiet for a moment, her eyes lowered, her hands still holding the fruit. Then she looked up. She said it tasted the way she had remembered. She said she had eaten Yamanashi once, a long time ago, when she was a child, when her own mother had taken her to the far side of the mountain to visit relatives who lived there. She said she had forgotten almost everything about that journey, the way you forget most things from when you were very young, but she had not forgotten the taste of the fruit. She ate it slowly, sitting in the warmth of the fire, while her 3 sons sat around her and the night settled over the village. She ate a second fruit, then a third. The fire crackled. Outside, the frost was forming, creeping across the window paper in its slow branching patterns, each branch finding its way across the cold surface with the patience of something that has all the time it needs. After a while, she said she was tired, but a different kind of tired from the tiredness she had felt for these long weeks. A good tired, the tiredness of an evening after a day of ordinary life, not the tiredness of a long illness. She lay down and pulled the quilt around her and closed her eyes. Her breathing steadied, evened out, became the slow, deep breathing of natural sleep. The 3 brothers sat around the fire. Taro put a little more wood on. Jiro filled 3 cups with tea from the pot on the warm stones and handed them around. Saburo held his cup in both hands and looked at the fire and felt the warmth of it on his face. He thought about the marsh. He thought about the bowl floating on the dark water. He thought about the bamboo grass on the ridge, bending in a direction that was not the wind's direction. He thought about the old woman's hands around the red bowl, drinking slowly. He thought about all the things that you could not understand from inside the ordinary life of the village, the things that required you to climb to the place where the path divided and stand there in the wind and listen. He thought that the mountain had not been trying to keep his brothers. It had simply been showing them something they had not been ready to receive. He was not sure that he, either, was entirely sure what it had shown him, but he thought that the showing was not finished, that there would be other days, other paths, other places where the ground was less solid than it appeared, and the only way forward was to step onto something that should not hold you and find that it did. The fire burned low. The 3 brothers sat in the warmth and drank their tea and listened to their mother breathing in the next room, steady and easy, the breathing of someone who is sleeping well. In the morning, their mother rose early. The first thing any of them noticed was her voice, which had returned to its full strength, the voice they had known all their lives, clear and unhurried, calling from the kitchen that the water was heating. The second thing they noticed was the color in her face, not the pale, careful color of recent weeks, something warmer, something that looked like the color that belongs to people who are living fully inside their own lives. She moved around the kitchen as she had always moved, purposefully, without hurry, the way someone moves in a space they know completely, the way someone moves in their own home. She made breakfast. She asked each of her sons how they had slept. Taro looked at Jiro. Jiro looked at Saburo. Saburo looked at the steam rising from his cup of tea in a thin, straight column that trembled slightly in the warm air of the kitchen and then dissolved. They all said they had slept well. Their mother nodded. She said that was good. She said that rest was important. She set the breakfast on the table and sat down across from them. She said she had dreamed of the mountain, and that in the dream it was summer, and the trees were full and green, and somewhere in the forest above the village a bird was singing. She said she had not been able to see the bird, but the singing had been very clear and very near, as though the bird were just around a corner that she kept almost turning. She said it had been a very good dream. That winter passed slowly, the way good winters pass, with plenty of firewood and enough to eat, and the quiet company of people who know each other well. The snow came in the new year, as it always did, and covered the paddies and the rooftops and the path that led up into the forest above the village, covering it so completely that by the middle of winter there was no sign it had ever been there. Just white, just the smooth, unbroken surface of the snow, going up into the trees and disappearing. In the evenings, the four of them sat around the fire. Their mother worked at her mending. Taro sharpened his tools. Jiro made rope, his hands moving in the practiced repetition of something he had done so many times it had become almost restful. The same motion again and again, the rope growing longer in the lamplight. Saburo read, sometimes, or simply sat and watched the fire and thought about things. No one spoke much about what had happened on the mountain, not because it could not be spoken of, but because it had settled into them in a way that did not require speaking. It had found its place among the other things they knew, and it rested there, quietly, the way a stone that has been somewhere for a long time rests in the ground. But sometimes Taro would look at his younger brother across the fire, and something would pass between them, a recognition, a small, quiet acknowledgement of something that did not need to be said aloud, to be fully understood by both of them. And sometimes Jiro would set down his rope and look at his hands for a moment. Just look at them, the way you look at something that you are glad is still there. And sometimes, on evenings, when the wind came down from the high ridge, carrying the smell of cedar and cold stone and deep water, Saburo would look up from whatever he was doing and listen, not to anything in particular, just to the sound of the wind moving through the village, the way it moved around the eaves, the way it found the gaps in the window paper and made a small sound there, a low, soft sound, like breathing, like the mountain breathing. Winter deepened. The snow on the mountain grew thick. The path up through the cedar forest lay buried and invisible under white. In the low evening light, the mountain was very beautiful, blue-gray and immense and still, the snow catching the last of the sun and holding it, glowing faintly against the darkening sky. The river ran quietly under its ice. The smoke from the village rose and drifted. The stars came out above the ridge, first one, then three, then many, filling the cold sky above the sleeping mountain. Inside, the fire was warm. Outside, the frost did its slow and patient work, turning the world to crystal, one surface at a time. The mother slept well that winter. Every morning she rose early. Every evening she sat by the fire with her sons around her and worked at her mending and asked her questions and listened to the answers. She was well. And the mountain above the village stood where it had always stood, patient and old, its ridges and its forests and its dark, still waters holding whatever they held in the quiet and the cold, as mountains do, as mountains have always done.